Yeah, so here we're going to start talking about social isolation, combating isolation through socialization. So, throughout the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about what is isolation, what is social isolation, and kind of look at some of the kind of the rising kind of concerns with that, because it's not only in the physician world do we have concerns with isolation, but it's actually just in general isolations becoming a little bit of a health issue. And then we'll talk specifically about physician isolation, how it starts and what can be done to kind of combat it. And through it, we'll do some, have a couple videos to kind of talk about it. Have a good presentation from a psychologist that got his psychology doctorate from OSU to kind of talk a little bit about, just isolation and the challenges there. But, the first thing we do is just kind of talk about, what is social isolation, and it's this kind of state of, basically lacking kind of social engagement. It has, minimal contacts and kind of just not having quality relationships. The idea is, I think we think of isolation, singularly as this idea that I'm not around other people, but there's also isolation that occurs when you can be around people, but not having good or rewarding or strong relationships that kind of nurture, and feeling still alone or kind of emptiness. And that kind of talks to that second point of the loneliness that is experienced through isolation, which is, one of the things we'll talk about is kind of being a health issue. So just kind of looking up some information while I was going through, just kind of getting, learning more about isolation and kind of its impact on people. It was interesting that they had this study that talked about how the rise of isolation has increased since the 1980s to now, and it's almost doubled. And it talks about just kind of American adults who experience that their feeling or being lonely has doubled since the 80s to now. And it's an interesting thing, is I think a lot of people would say, well, I can be even more connected than I ever was before via things like social media and your Facebooks and stuff like that. But the reality of it is some of that stuff doesn't really do anything to help us deal with isolation. In some ways, it may be more of the stuff that promotes us not connecting and reaching out to be around people and develop our kind of the relationships that nurture our soul. Here, just kind of wanted to kind of put this up here, like kind of this current trends of statistically of where things are at, and it's kind of interesting. They talked about just that in household sizes, people are even much less likely to have engagements with more people in it. From people living by themselves in the 70s, it was like 17%, and now it's 27%. And it's not that it's wrong to live by yourself, or if you don't have a family or things like that, but it is one of those things that it kind of just shows this drive that we have, kind of more individualized kind of things and less community-based kind of stuff. So the first thing I just want to kind of bring, I think I told you, is have a little bit of a video and kind of give an introduction about the concerns of isolation. And I'll talk a little bit more too as we kind of go through the slides about isolation and the health concerns that just become from being isolated. So we'll start this video.
The sense of loneliness is also on the rise. In the 1980s, scholars estimated that about 20% of Americans felt lonely at any given point in time. 2 recent nationally representative surveys indicate that this number has doubled. But you don't hear people talking about feeling lonely. And that's because loneliness is stigmatized. The psychological equivalent of being a loser in life or a weak person. And this is truly unfortunate, because it means we're more likely to deny feeling lonely, which makes no more sense than denying we feel hunger, thirst, or pain. For living with loneliness, we now know, is a major risk factor for broad-based morbidity and mortality. Consider a couple of the conditions we know about premature death. Living with air pollution increases your odds of an early death by 5%. Living with obesity, we know, a national health problem, increases your odds of an early death by 20%. Excessive alcohol consumption, 30%. A recent meta-analysis of over 100,000 participants shows that living with loneliness increases your odds of an early death by 45%.
You know, so I thought that it was interesting just watching that video, and it kind of doubled down on a little bit the other research I was finding about just kind of social isolation and loneliness. Is that it's a health crisis when we are dealing with loneliness, and the idea is that it's increasing, and then one of the challenges is that people are fearful of being able to talk about being lonely. Like there's something wrong with being lonely. We could talk about other ailments, but we don't seem to talk about that. I know that's kind of one of the themes about with this series in general is like working on our mental wellness. The idea that our brain and our kind of emotional being needs the same kind of attention that we give to our physical self. We have no problem taking time sometimes to get a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour to be able to go to the gym and exercise, or eat or do things that help our physical state. But do we take that same time to do for our emotional state? And this is another one of those things. The topics is this isolation, and do we take time to have things that nurture that? And if we're struggling and feeling lonely, are we reaching out and being able to talk about it? And if we're not, we're really creating in our personal worlds a health concern that's going to. It starts in our heads and our brains and our emotional being, but it will move into our physical well-being, which is kind of some of the points we put on this next slide. Is that health issues associated with being isolated or being lonely is that we're less likely to be physically active. When we don't have something helping us motivated, we sometimes tend to not do that. We have more symptoms of depression or anxiety and other mental health issues. If you already have pre-existing mental health issues, they only exacerbate those. And if not, you can experience the symptoms of those things, of not feeling connected, of feeling alone, sleep problems, sleeping too much, not sleeping enough, having anxiety which keeps you up, or have restless sleep, reduced cognitive functioning. Loneliness distracts us from being able to think clearly. It sometimes it preoccupies our mind, the sadness that may come with feeling empty or not having that kind of emotional, spiritual nurturing that we would get from healthier quality relationships. And there's other health issues, and I think they talked about it just briefly on the video, things like that your mortality is more likely to be affected, and increased mortality because of being lonely. People that are more connected and have more nurturing relationships or quality relationships tend to have better health, and a better health overall will prolong life. I thought this was an interesting quote that said that there have been studies that have shown that loneliness can actually be a big risk factor for premature death, and be as much of a risk factor for premature death as obesity and smoking. And we know that. It said that in the video too, that these things are concerns. And I think we talk about these, and it says in the public health sphere. I think it's interesting. We talk about these things in the public health. We know that smoking is bad for you. Obesity is a concern. Eating well, getting exercise, being healthy will prolong your life. But we don't talk about how loneliness and that same kind of social epidemic in the same way as we talk about things like obesity or smoking. And yet, I think we're much more likely to, on a person-to-person basis, experience that, and then not to feel like we have the ability to be able to talk about that. And that's one of those kind of stigmas that come with this. I mean, it's interesting. I think we'll talk next session about counseling. I think there's a stigma that comes like if I go receive help and get counseling because I'm feeling, some emotional distress, or I'm feeling lonely, like I have to do that kind of quiet, and I can't seek that out. Like it's not a healthy thing to do, like going to see your physician annually or something like that. So just another quote here, social isolation is highly prevalent among physicians. So we're going to talk about physician isolation, kind of from this point on. It starts, when the physician's young by nature, and we're talking now even before going into med school, that many of our, they say, this quote says, many were quiet and studious. Face it. Now I'm not saying this, but the physician here that shared this in this story, face it, we were nerds, or at least closet nerds. We were the self-motivated, deeply engaged in academics, and didn't gravitate towards team play, all of which would create a sense of isolation. It's one of those things that it's kind of saying, people that tend to get into this field tend to be more studious, tend to be more driven towards learning, not necessarily engaging in other activities. I'm saying this is a universal truth for everybody, but it kind of has different motivations when you're getting into the medical field. And then once you get into this field, there's things like the work hours, the expectations, both internal and external. And I think those are some of the biggest factors that create isolation, is that this competition that's there, and it's cutthroat, and it creates a sense of like, to myself, and not learning how to nurture out and reach out, because there's so much concern. And this concern of showing weakness, which I hear that quite often when I'm talking to physicians, when I'm working with them. They didn't want to ask for help because they didn't want to be perceived as weak. And it's like, yet we encourage that from the patients and the clients we work with, is to reach out and ask for help. That it's not a sign of weakness, but yet we get driven in this field, being a physician, that reaching out and help, and then it creates that sense of like, I'm on my own. I have to self-rely on developing, coming up with problems. But if I'm stuck and I'm in isolation, it's hard. You're the only person that's giving you feedback is you, and it's sometimes not giving the best feedback because you have limited perspective, which we'll talk about when it's in the solution part of like, how it's so important to have those outside perspectives. Again, I thought this was another interesting quote, and I've linked the blog to this quote, which said, if someone were to ask me what one of the worst parts of struggling in medical school was, I would say it was isolation that the struggle created, that the isolation was that the struggle created. Of course, the fear of falling out or failing out of school was massive, but the isolation that became so inherent in this struggle may have impacted me more. This person, if you read on along with the blog, went on to become a psychiatrist, and they talked about throughout this shared experience about how isolation and that fear of struggle, and fear of being able to ask for help, and fear like he had to kind of do this on it, was really crippling and was impactful, and really kind of, not only was it impactful in the sense of this challenge in school, but how it carried on beyond into the professional career. Just one more thing about physician isolation. Another quote from another article. Physician burnout, often defined as emotional exhaustion, ineffectiveness, and depersonalization, may be linked to four values characteristic of physicians and reinforced in medical training: service excellence, curative competence, and compassion. Although each one of these is virtuous strength and a source of pride for physicians, each possesses a destructive dark side. Deprivation, invincibility, omnipotence, and isolation. And I think that last piece that we're talking about is isolation. These characteristics that we're kind of trained to strive for, they have positives, but they also have negatives. And then when we aren't keeping in check, and we aren't able to talk about the both sides of the coin, we can really fall into dark places, and isolation being one of those. Like, if I keep pushing myself for perfection and and giving of myself, and learning and self-sacrificing to great degrees, I might not be taking care of myself and not nurturing the things I need to take care of, so I don't become kind of lonely by myself, push off from other people, not connected with positive relationships. And then we're talking about this idea of how do you combat isolation. And I think it's important to kind of bring back to the basics of us as being human beings, is that we're social beings. We're meant to be connected with other people, and not just connected in the sense of I'm around other human beings, but I'm connected. I have relationships that they nurture me. That's something that we need from when we're born. I'm going through that right now. I have an infant son, and you just see that he needs us and his family, and me and his mom and his sisters, and to be there, and the grandparents, and we connect, and we build and bring this person up, and it nurtures, and it gets happy, and it makes him feel good, and it gets reassurance, and it feels safety. And we all need that. I don't think that those are things that we necessarily lose. They come in different forms and shapes as we grow older and evolve. But we need each other, and we need that nurturing, we need that support, we need that kind of deep connection with each other, that safety, that security, that ability to be able to be vulnerable, which is what we talked about before. And when we don't have that, we become isolated, and we then become, we go against our nature. And I think it's important also that we know the difference between having healthy alone time, which I think we all need moments, especially if you're introverted. I mean, I know that that's a case for me where I sometimes have to step back from situations and stuff like that to regroup. That's okay to have time to regroup and kind of recollect myself. But the difference between isolation, which is I'm just not connecting. I don't have valuable relationships. I feel alone or vulnerable. Vulnerable in the sense that if I reach out, I'm going to be hurt by something. Those kind of things are the difference, a huge difference. And we also have to challenge the kind of the internal and external roadblocks, bucking the pre-existing norms about what we think about isolation and loneliness. That these things are things that we're allowed to talk about, and if we don't talk about it, we are going to hurt ourselves. And recognizing that we don't have to always kind of fall into the mold of what we've been told that we have to be. I refer back to the quotes that we talked about with physicians and dealing with isolation and the challenges there and the kind of pre-existing expectations that come in. So sometimes those can be challenged, and I don't have to fall into that system. And I hear a lot that the kind of the millennials coming into the workforce of coming into the hospitals and becoming physicians and whatnot, that they do buck some of that. They do think about themselves and the things that they need to do to take care of themselves, and they're challenging some of that. In some ways, that's good. Like it's important to have the time that I need to not be overwhelmed, to be swamped by stuff, and then all of a sudden, all I can do is go home, and I just kind of stuck with my self-processing and not developing the healthy relationships that I need that good balance and have to be able to reach out and find ways to connect with others. And just another quote talking about the kind of the social beings of what we are as humans. It says, that we are social animals that evolved to do best when we're engaged with others. Also, when we're with friends and family, we benefit from social cognition. Where you're to pick up on what others are doing for health, and others encourage you to do something about your health. I think this is another one of the benefits of why we need to reach out. It's not only because it connects and there's emotional reward, but we also get to see and witness what is working and what is not working. I've been in the field of counseling for the last 15 years, and I repeatedly tell people the best kind of counseling is group counseling. A lot of people go to individual counseling because I don't want to let people know about it and stuff. But the reality is, when we get into a group setting and we share with other people what's going on, or see what other people, especially when we're struggling with similar things, if I'm depressed or I'm overwhelmed or I'm struggling with a relationship or whatever it is, you start connecting and seeing what other people are doing to improve their lives, or you see things that aren't so successful and able to say, oh, I find myself doing that, and can change that behavior. And so for me, when people are struggling with issues, the best thing to do is get around other people to get feedback and ideas from them and see what they're doing. And in fact, that's validated through what Vanderbilt Center of Professional Health does when they work with they combat isolation or physician health issues. They believe that doctor rehabilitation involves professionals working with other professionals in their environments with physicians, with other physicians. That's how the physician can get well and combat this stuff, is seeing what other people are doing to get better. And I know that it's a true thing, because I also not only when I deal with physicians that are maybe struggling with stress and burnout or behavioral issues or mental health issues, it's what we do when we have people that have substance abuse issues. That a lot of times we encourage places that have that work with professionals, have professional experience, or other professional peers there, that they can have that shared experience, that know that they're not alone. I mean, the next statement says, when a doctor gets in trouble and they feel alone, and that they're, being in the therapeutic process when they're with other physicians helps them know that they're not alone, not some kind of weird outliner, and that other physicians struggle. And I think that's huge. And I think it's important, and kudos to everybody that's here, kind of just talking about it. I mean, I'm kind of just sharing some basic information about, the challenge of isolation and loneliness. But I think the real thing comes in from shared experience with other physicians, talking with other physicians. I think this hopefully is one way that you're trying to create that kind of network of, like, when I'm struggling, I have places to go. and don't have to take this all on my own, because that's the mentality that gets people burned out and pushed even further away from the things that nurture their souls. Other ways that they talk about just being able to become socially active, right? And I have one more little video clip that'll kind of follow this part, talking about solutions as well. But right, reaching out to family and friends, I think we all kind of know that it seems like an obvious kind of thing, but yet sometimes if we look back, how much time are we spending out and connecting, especially people that really nurture us. Get involved, do something like join a club or join some interest that you have. And a lot of us have interest, but we just say we don't have time to do this and do that. But I think it's important that we make time, especially things that feed our souls outside of our work life, our other additional kind of hobbies or interests. Being part of that, we tend to be happier. I know for me, I don't know if I necessarily join a club, but I play on a soccer team, and that's really important for me. Like that time, we play a game a week or whatever it is, that time of getting there, the socialization before and afterwards, and the actual event and the teamwork that comes really helps boost the rest of the week. We do a game tonight, and it boosts the rest of the week. It kind of helps push and give the energy for moving on. And I think there's a lot of things we can do. It doesn't have to be necessarily physical, but other activities like a book club or something like that can help promote us and get us into things that help nurture outside of just the profession that we're in. And sometimes we get so stuck in that. That's part of the thing that drives our isolation, is we're in that head mindset, and when we leave, we stay stuck in that and can't pull out of it, and it doesn't help with our developing other relationships. It says get a pet, but get a pet's kind of one of those ideas. Is not only is that a good relationship maybe that could help nurture things, but also about the idea that when you have that, it comes with responsibilities, takes you to dog parks and things like that. It gets you around other people where you can start hopefully engaging in relationship or having an interest and and having something that connects you with more people, and volunteering. Obviously, that's another huge one that I think it feeds the souls in a variety of different way. It connects you with other people, but it also allows you to do some activity that you're there to help give back. I'll show this another little clip, and I think after that we'll be pretty close to the end of the presentation, and then we can kind of just talk about this topic a little bit and kind of engage. And for me, one of the things when we're doing this, engaging in the conversation, is to talk about the challenges of maybe the work world and how that kind of pulls you away from the things you want to do, and some of you guys may be able to share solutions that you have to combat that.
Well, if loneliness is dangerous, what can we do about it? When we're hungry, we can go to the refrigerator and get a snack. When we're thirsty, we can go to the faucet and draw a glass of water. But when we're lonely, we have no pantry full of friends with whom we can connect. And no, online social networking does not replace the comforting touch of a friend. First, recognize what the signal is and don't deny it. Second, understand what it does to your brain, to your body, to your behavior. It's dangerous as a member of the social species to feel isolated, and our brain snaps into a self-preservation mode. That brings with it some unwanted and unknown effects on our thoughts and our actions toward others. Be aware of those, understand those effects, and take responsibility for your actions toward others. And third, respond. Understanding that it's not the quantity of friends, it's the quality of a few relationships that actually matter. Attend to the three components of connectedness. One can promote intimate connections by developing one individual who's trusted, in whom you can confide, and who can confide in you. You can promote relational connectedness by simply sharing good times with friends and family. We often go to the dinner table happy that we've provided for our family, but having forgotten to share any good times with them en route. Collective connectedness can be promoted by becoming a part of something bigger than yourselves. If the obstacles to connection seem insurmountable, consider volunteering for something that you enjoy. perhaps helping to serve the needy, volunteering in a museum, a zoo, a running club, or a TEDx event, or simply taking time to speak to elders at a retirement home. Sharing good times is one of the keys to connection. And don't wait. The next time you feel alienated, isolated, or excluded, respond to that aversive signal as you would hunger, thirst, and pain, and get connected. Thank you.
You know, and I hope that that kind of last little piece resonates a little bit. The idea is that when we are struggling with other things, we respond to it. If I'm hungry, if I'm tired, I get sleep, if I get food. And I think that's the same thing when we deal with like feeling isolated and feeling lonely. When we're feeling that signal, our body tells us this doesn't feel right, that this isn't where I want to be. Respond to it, and respond to it in ways that can be productive. You know, we talked about just a couple ideas in there, and a couple things to consider, but the idea is, you know, moving forward, don't let it just sit there. And I think sometimes we let that, like, and a lot of times when we're stuck in some pathology, let that negativity like fester and build, and that just prevents us from actually getting to a place of wellness. And hopefully the goal here is to kind of say, I'm learning, I know what that signal sounds like, and then responding to it. Now, I know that a lot of you guys may not necessarily, some of you guys may have a lot of this dealt with in a healthy way. But, you know, I think we all at some points in our lives have experienced loneliness. We all experience, at some point, experience isolation. And how do we get out of that? And being able to share and connect with others. And hopefully when we talk about this isolation as it relates to physicians, you know, and the environment that physicians are kind of put in and the expectations that are kind of put in, that we recognize that there are, you know, that it's okay to feel those things, it's okay to talk about those things, and it's okay to reach out for those things. You know, at the end of this presentation, I just got the one last slide. There's some resources. I just kind of put some articles and the continuation of that full video. I thought it was an interesting video just talking about isolation and loneliness just in general. Then there's some links to some specific physician, you know, isolation and the challenges there, articles that you can read. But anyhow, that's kind of just just this kind of overall kind of thing with just talking about isolation and loneliness and how it relates to physicians and some of the challenges there and some of the things that we've done. So I'll turn it over to Kate and then go from there.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Nelson, for giving us that great overview. Are there any questions from our group that would like to ask Nelson? I'll give you a couple of minutes.
Yeah, or share anything that kind of your challenges with you know, isolation or the challenges of being able to connect.
Well, Nelson, while we're waiting on a question, and doing a little research on the topic myself, I was interested in hearing how families of physicians also feel the impact of isolation, of having you know, kids or maybe other spouses who are married to physicians are also indirectly and directly impacted by isolation. Could you maybe address how maybe to some potential solutions to breaking that cycle with their families?
Sure. I mean, I think that is kind of one of the challenges that kind of comes from this topic when it came up. You know, as something to talk about is that, right, the demand of whatever the job is and the schedule and kind of the commitment that kind of goes in there kind of pulls that person away, but then also the family can felt themselves pulled away from that person, or they can themselves start experiencing isolation because of not being able to nurture the relationship, especially the one that they valued or created. You know, as far as the solutions go, you know, I think it's important, and I know that when we're trying to, in my job of working with people and trying to reconnect or recreate families, it's really important to schedule time with these important people, especially with the family scenario, is that we're going to make commitments with each other to allow ourselves not to isolate, and find strategies also within that, you know, the time that we're together that forces that kind of that interaction to kind of share and create a relationship. It's not just a matter of being there at the same time. which is a lot of times people do things. It's like, well, we spent time together, we went to a movie. Well, how much did you share and how much did you talk and how much did you interact in that kind of experience? So it's not necessarily just the time, but it's the event that you do that kind of promotes and generates conversation and talking. I know one of the things that games can be like that, where you're playing something that makes you kind of like share. Like I have this really fun game that we have at this house called Really Bad Art, and it's just like you get 10 seconds to draw a little bad picture, and everybody has to guess what it is based off the cards everybody drew. And people, it helps connect. It gets the family together, the kids, and we have the grandparents play, and it's talking, and then we start, it generates other conversations, things to share about, and then it gives you also an experience that you go back to and relate with, and how well it connected, and it generates that motivation to want to then go do something again. I think that's what the important part of when you do some activities to try to connect, is have something that generates this idea that we want to do this again. This is important to connect us, that our relationship needs to be nurtured, and why we obviously have demands and expectations that are big and can't do it all the time, that it's so important that we will make the commitment that'll do it. And so, that's just one example of kind of something, but something that kind of pulls and generates and, asks us to connect with the family, or if it's just a significant other, making the time for, date nights, but date nights that are actually active things that we are engaged and we have to communicate and be part of and share with that. It relates to families. So
well, I think one of the topics that you mentioned earlier in the beginning of the session was saying that social media is really not a replacement, and that people are really feeling lonely. Even the fact that social media is so prevalent in our lives. Can you maybe speak to the bonus of having one-on-one contact more than maybe using social media as the outlet?
Yeah, well, I would say that in the sense you're right. So I don't think there's anything wrong with social media. Social media is a fine tool, and it's a good way to find people and connect. But it's much just like I would say I would use it in the sense of like a dating service like Match.com, where like you can get this kind of little social connection and see some things about people and know stuff, but it doesn't going to replace. I'm not finding my soulmate based off of a paragraph profile, something or something. It's about when I get in front of somebody and I see that what really connects. You see the personal relationship, how a person's responding to you. You can see the compassion, you can see the empathy, you can see the joy, you can see the sadness, or you can see those things that you couldn't necessarily see when you're kind of doing stuff via, typing some things out and kind of going back and forth on an IM messenger and stuff like that. No emoji is going to replace that personal emotion that you see with a human being. And I think that's really important. We all know that whoever's ever, I'm sure many of our participants have ever had, the children or whatnot, is the idea when you first have like a child and your baby starts smiling at you and you see that happiness. I mean, you felt happy, but when you see the other thing connect, you're like, oh my God, and just that face, that joy, that brings, you get an emotional surge. Those, the endorphins are rushing in you, and you feel that stuff. And so that's the thing you can't replace. I can't get a hug from a computer, and those kind of stuff that kind of gives us, we get it when we hug another human being. We get the little that burst of it's oxytocins or whatever it is that kind of comes out of us when we feel connected, that we couldn't receive via things that aren't personal. I enjoy doing these things on the webinar, but I think that's the same way we have when I do presentations in front of people, or via computers, that you get to see the response of people, and it all helps direct kind of the conversation and where things are going, or slows down and says, I think there's something that came from here that we really wanted to talk about that I wouldn't have got without seeing that that demeanor. So